applause, I'll reintroduce, please, Lord Christopher Monckton. Thank you, Christopher.
Well, bless you all. And the first thing I want to say is congratulations to the Dorset region of UKIP for the astonishing and rapid and steady growth that you're achieving, the excellent candidates that you're selecting. And I hope that in the next series of both European and eventually British general elections, you will slap the other parties all over the shop. And there is no doubt that something has begun to happen. Amen. People are suddenly beginning to see that UKIP is not a bunch of loonies, fruitcakes and closet racists. It is instead, arguably, the only sane political party in Britain today. I mean, you only have to look at the issue I talked about this morning, which I don't propose to say too much about now, which is windmills. The only party in the mainstream politics in Britain that opposes this climate change nonsense, root and branch, hook, line and sinker, is UKIP. We are determined that as soon as we form the next government, which might now be rather sooner than the others think, we will sweep away the climate change department, we will withdraw subsidies from every windmill, solar panel and electric dinky toy, and we will say not a penny more. Enough is enough. And we have a message also for the European tyranny by clerk. A strange form of government, if you think about it. Everywhere else that it has been tried, it has failed. It was tried in the Persian Empire, which became effete and mired in bureaucracy. They tried it again in the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, which died under the weight of bureaucracy. They tried it in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They tried it also in the Sultan's control of much of Eastern Europe. All of these things they've tried over and over again. And bureaucratic centralist tyranny is not a sensible form of government. More importantly, from our point of view, here in UKIP, it is not a democratic form of government. Because call me old-fashioned, but I believe in the idea of letting the voters decide who shall govern them, by what laws they shall be governed, and what taxes they shall pay. It is no business of some invisible, bloated, unelected bureaucrats behind closed doors in Brussels or Strasbourg to tell us, the British people, how we should run our affairs, even down to the last shred of orange peel in the marmalade and the last angle at which a banana must be bent. Once again, oh, Barroso, enough is enough. And one can use those three deadly words which Nigel Farage deploys to such dazzling effect. Every time he stands up in Brussels, he turns to Barroso and to that, what's that name, that damp rag, Rumpy Pumpy. And, oh, I could be fined for that. And he just looks at them and he says, who elected you? And there they sit, like the rabbits they are, trembling as the voice of the people is for the first time heard in the echoing halls of Strasbourg. And that is what the people of Britain have now come to understand. They have come to understand that it is we, ordinary people in UKIP, and a few extraordinary ones, in fact quite a lot of extraordinary ones, we, ordinary people, speaking with the language of the ordinary people. We don't talk bureaucratic. I mean, can you imagine if you let the European Union's legislative drafting unit try to redraft Hamlet's great soliloquy? It might come, some of you will have heard this before, but some of you may not. You're getting it anyway. It would come out something like this. I must do a teapot acting pose, mustn't I? To be, or the contrary. Whether the former or the latter be preferable would seem to admit of some difference of opinion, the answer in the present case being of an affirmative or a negative character, according as to whether one elects on the one hand mentally to endure the disfavour of fortune, albeit in an extreme degree, or on the other boldly to envisage adverse conditions in the prospect of eventually bringing them to a conclusion. The condition of sleep is similar to, if not indistinguishable from, that of death, and with the addition of finality, the former might be considered identical with the latter, so that in this connection, if the addition could be effected, a termination would be put to the endurance of a multiplicity of inconveniences, not to mention a number of downright evils incidental to our fallen humanity, and thus a consummation achieved of a most gratifying nature. And it's so much better in the original, don't you think? And actually, I should confess that that brilliant piece of writing is not me. It's Sir Arthur Quiller Couch, who is the product of the only good decision that a Liberal government ever took. And they appointed him as the Professor of English at Cambridge in 1912. And on the 1st of May 1913, he gave a lecture to his students about how they should avoid the use of jargon. And I should like every EU bureaucrat, and quite a few of our own, to be made to listen to that lecture at least once a year, to remind them to talk in the language in which UKIP talks, which is the language of ordinary people. And this is important, because what is it that UKIP is for? Why UKIP? Why do we bother to put up with the vilification, the insults, the marginalisation, the refusal of the newspapers to let us have our say, the refusal of the BBC to do anything other than sneer? Why do we tolerate this? Why do we still turn up to these meetings, go out on the streets, recruit new members? Why do we bother? Well, I'll tell you why we bother. Patriotism, it is said, or was said once, is the last refuge of the scoundrel. Well, no, it isn't. It is the first pleasure and the first duty of every subject of Her Majesty. And what do we celebrate when we are patriotic in a democratic country? We celebrate that love for our fellow citizens, our fellow subjects of Her Majesty, that allows us to put our trust in them at the ballot box to exercise sensible choices about who should govern them. We won't always agree with the choice of our fellow citizens. But this we know, as Churchill himself said, that democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for all the others. And it is democracy that is what UKIP is really about. Yes. It is to say, we have had enough of other people remote from us, telling us what to do, spending our money for us, not allowing us to keep any of it, and pushing us around. That's not what the people want. Once people have got used to the idea that by putting their vote on a piece of paper and putting it in a ballot box, that makes a difference to who governs them and what those who govern us do, that is not something you can so easily take away. They thought they could take it away by setting up the European dictatorship on tyrannical lines, and they nearly got away with it. But UKIP is now the biggest threat in the whole of Europe to this ludicrous project. They are frightened of us. They're frightened of us because our MEPs in Brussels and Strasbourg have made their presence felt. They have said, we represent the voice of the people, you represent only the voice of Europe's governing class. And increasingly what has happened, and people can feel it, and that's why they're joining UKIP now, the governing class, not only in Britain, not only in Europe, but increasingly worldwide, via institutions such as the UN and the World Trade Organization and so forth. Many of these organizations, some of them are doing good things, but all of them are doing things unelected. So if, for instance, we want to decide who is going to be the next Secretary General of the UN, who's going to be on the Security Council, we can't. Every time power is transferred from the elected hands of our politicians here to any supranational institution, whether it be the EU or the UN or whatever, it passes from elected hands here to unelected hands somewhere else. And democracy dies a little every time that happens.
Yeah.
We have now lost so much of our democracy by that process that people are now beginning to feel it, and you'll hear it expressed in a number of different ways. They will say, for instance, why should we bother? It doesn't matter who we vote for, it doesn't make any difference. And until recently that was true. Because you could vote for any of the major parties. They were all of the same view that the European Union was wonderful because it gives them jobs after they get thrown out of the British Parliament. Think Neil Kinnock and his wife Glenys. A huge drain upon the taxpayer that ought to be stopped at once. All of these transfers of power are to the governing class and away from the ordinary people. The whole climate change scam, that's what it's all about. It's taking money and power from ordinary people and putting it in the hands of rich landowners, rich governments and bureaucrats, scientists, academics, the elite generally, helping itself to ever larger fistfuls of taxpayers' money without the slightest shred of scientific or economic justification. And somebody has to speak for the victims of this process, which are, of course, the ordinary people who have to pay for the EU. So here is my modest proposal. The country's going bust. In fact, we're beyond bust. The national deficit every year is still of the order of 150 to 200,000 million pounds. And it's growing so rapidly that in the last 5 years, the national debt that took something like 250 years to accumulate has doubled again in the lifetime of this government. It's a staggering, very dangerous rate of decline. Where is all this money going? It's not going to the people, largely. It's going to the European Union. That's where we get the biggest saving. Come out of the European Union, and you go quite a large way towards balancing Britain's books. Come out of the climate change nonsense, you save another 10 or 20 billion a year. Come out of foreign aid, because for the moment we can't afford it. I mean, in principle it's a nice idea, but just for the moment we can't afford it. Another 10 or 20 billion a year. Then you say to immigrants, look, you're very welcome to come here, but if you come, you've got to bring with you an insurance certificate that covers you against the cost of any illness you may get while you're here. You have to be covered against any unemployment that you may suffer while you're here, and any welfare requirement. You must produce insurance cover to show that you can pay for that, because we're not going to.
Bravo.
Now that's not a racialist policy. It'll apply to everybody. In fact, we're even less racialist than the other parties, because it would apply equally not only to people from Africa or South America, but also to people from the EU countries. They too can come here at the moment, help themselves to our benefits, and we can't afford it anymore. Half of all operations at King's College Hospital in London are performed on people who have no entitlement to them. That's how big it is now. And also, half of all operations throughout the NHS are performed on people who have made themselves ill, willfully, in 4 categories. They eat too much, they drink too much, they smoke too much, or they do drugs too much. And we pay. Well, the time has come that we can't anymore. And the thing is that nobody except UKIP is making any of these really obvious points. And that's why increasingly UKIP is listened to with respect, because we are looking at the real problems that face real people in the real world, and not all this theoretical nonsense about how altering 1 part in 3,000 of the atmospheric composition over 100 years will somehow bring to an end a planet that has survived perfectly well for 4.5 billion years. Now you may think, oh, Monckton is exaggerating, but the Stern report on the economics of climate change, done by a civil servant who's been given a peerage for this, is actually done on the basis that there is a 1 in 10 chance that the world will come to an end by 2100 because of global warming caused by us. A 1 in 10 chance. And you may think I'm kidding, but I'm not. And I'm going to give you the proof. You can either turn to page 261 and look at the box on there where he shows what his prime discount rate is, or you can read a paper called Stern, Dietz et al. 2007, in which the statement I have just made to you is explicitly stated. That was the basis on which the Stern report was written. That is how crazy the governing class has now become. Now this craziness is born partly of desperation, because they've realized that the communist sort of arrangement of endlessly getting more and more power and wealth into the center that they've all been following hasn't worked and is now terminally failing because the money is running out. The welfare state is fine, as Margaret Thatcher used to say, until other people's money run out. Well, it's now run out. And they're all terrified. So they want to use things like climate change and the European Union as distractions from facing the real problems that their over-centralized, over-costly, over-generous to those who don't always deserve it system of government has brought about. And people are beginning to realize that this old order is going to have to change because the money has run out. And that's really my central message to you today. It is that the days of the bureaucratic, centralist, socialist, communist, fascist state, call it whatever label you want, those days are over. Just at the moment when we fear that we've lost the argument, we have in fact won it by the simplest method of all, that the money to pay for their way of governing Britain has gone. Because their way of governing Britain is, in the long run, unaffordable. And so what we're saying with that still small voice of truth is no, we're not going to go down the route of eternal bankruptcy, which is all that the other parties have on offer. If even after so-called austerity, you end up doubling the national debt during the lifetime of one parliament, then whatever else that is, it's not exactly prudent financial management, now is it? And somebody has to say these things. And that's really what we are about. We call a spade a spade. They don't. You know what they call it in the legislative drafting unit of the European Commission? They call it a one-person operated, manually controlled, foot-powered implement of simple and robust, yet adequately efficacious ligno-metallic composition, designated primarily, though by no means exclusively, for utilisation on the part of hourly paid operatives deployed in the agricultural, horticultural, or constructional trades or industries, as the case may be, for purposes of carrying out such excavational tasks or duties as may be designated from time to time by supervisory grades as being necessary, desirable, expedient, apposite, or germane, with regard to the ongoing furtherance of the task or objective in hand, or on the other hand, underfoot Secretary General. And we reject that kind of waffle. We are no longer prepared to listen to acres of bullshit. Enough's enough. What we want is for the true, real problems of this country to be addressed in a sensible fashion via the ballot box. And I would like, personally, this is not necessarily UKIP policy now, I depart a little from the script here, I would like personally to see Europe also becoming democratic. But I don't think that the bureaucrats want that, because they would then have to go and kiss babies like what we have to do. They have to go out in the rain and stand in political parties, and they might get rejected by the electorate. And they wouldn't like that, because they wouldn't feel so grand and untouchable as they feel now. And that's precisely why the democracy for which we stand is such a thoroughly good thing. And that is why the British people increasingly are realising that those who call us fruitcakes and loonies and closet racists do so not because they believe we are, but because they know we are not. And they know the British people know we are not. They know we speak now with the voice of the people, a voice which cannot any longer be denied. We will be heard. Of that, you can have no doubt. And as each election comes, so we advance a little more. It's a long slog. I don't think it's necessarily going to be as brilliant in 2015 as we would like. Always other things come along, people get distracted. But we'll still continue to advance steadily. And while we remain generous of spirit and at one with one another and at one with the British people in saying we want our country back, we want our democracy back, that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from our continent or from our nation or from the earth. For as long as we are cheerfully saying those things, we will increasingly be heard with respect and eventually with conviction by voters who will put their cross in the UKIP box on the ballot paper. That's what we're working for, and whether they like it or not, we will advance and advance and advance until eventually, in my lifetime, we will form the government of Britain and give it back to its own people. God bless you all, and a happy